We are back. It is our final segment this morning with Tiffany Patterson, Associate Professor of African American Studies at Vanderbilt. It's good to have her on, talking Juneteenth, of course. And, our last caller, appreciate it. She mentioned Leopold's Ghost has a very worthwhile book to read about the history. You say there's another one, too. And you say Leopold's Ghost is terrific.
It's a great book. Yeah. And then the most recent one that's come out, which I'm only halfway through, is Howard French, Born to Blackness. It's a global history of the Atlantic world, and there he starts the discussion in 1471. The previous caller talked about some of what he's talking about, Belgium, the role of European countries in starting the slave trade. It's Britain, Belgium, the Portuguese especially were heavily involved. And he starts there. He has an earlier book too about the current situation with Africa. It's called China, Africa's New Continent, or because the Chinese are all migrating to Africa in different countries and taking over the businesses and so on right now as we talk. And we teach that in one of our courses at Vanderbilt. But Howard French's book is fantastic.
Okay.
It's not for high school. I think it's a little dense for that. But for college, it's one that certainly after you know some basic information. And then I said Adam Hofschau's, the previous caller's recommendation, is great.
So is your hope now, as you continue to teach, I guess you said you're getting closer to retirement, and I hate the thought of any professor like you leaving the field. We need more like you. But when you look at the education process, I know there's a certain degree of pushback, and we see a rise in a certain degree of racism, but do you have hopes that this history will start being taught again in high schools?
Yes, we're going to keep pushing. There's a large collection of people from many backgrounds teaching global Africa in some respects, either on the continent itself or in Europe. That's my colleague. I ended up here because I think someone talked to my colleague who couldn't be here. She's in Italy. She's a European, and she works on blacks in Europe. We have people who work, there's a new book that's come out by a man named Kito Swan, and it's a fabulous book because he takes the diaspora studies part and to the South Pacific, following in the footsteps of a Howard University professor who years ago named Merz Tate, who wrote on the South Pacific. Their African ships went to the South Pacific as well and deposited slaves. So this was a global trafficking in people. But as I said, there were other people enslaved. Whites run away from that history of enslavement. There is enslavement occurring now. I taught a course last year on black migrations, and one of the things that's happening is in countries that are poor in Africa, many are trying to make their way to countries, the port cities, which used to be the slave coast, to get jobs in places like Italy. They apply for jobs, and they get to Italy and find out it's not what they thought it was. They're being prostituted, and they're in prostitution. My students were just outraged when they learned about this, of the number of young women, black girls and women who are being prostituted in those places, and they get there and their families lose contact with them. They can't find them.
They all go there under false pretenses. They don't know, and when they get there, it's too late for them to do anything.
Exactly. So we're not talking about a history that's completely past. We're talking about the residue of history now, as well as needing to know how we got here. And I think no one should be afraid to study this material, regardless of their background. It is a fascinating subject matter and never ends.
And what I think as we wrap, as you said, there are some who feel threatened or are not comfortable with teaching certain parts of this history, or I hear parents, which to me, I have a son and I made a point of making sure he was educated in all of these things, but that they're afraid it's going to make their kids feel bad when they hear about this, or crap like that, which is exactly what that is crap. History is not pretty, okay? And so I'm just wondering though, you said earlier, teaching it, you shouldn't feel threatened by revealing what it is in the past if you happen to be white and feel as though this is something you don't want to have your children learn, because in the long run, it serves us all, doesn't it?
It serves the whole country. It serves all humanity. As we end, I hope the parents out there will find a way to educate their children. There are good, excellent books for children, or for younger people rather, textbooks which are more general, which will introduce them to the subject. And students don't feel bad. They get angry that they don't know, or if they feel bad, they get over it because it becomes fascinating to them.
Well, I'm sorry you feel bad about it.
Yeah.
Come on. This was slavery. You should feel lousy about it. It's not your fault. But you should. I mean, I just don't understand. Well, we don't want that taught because it's going to be upsetting. You know, what?
Well, we teach the Holocaust.
Yeah.
We teach the annihilation of native peoples.
Exactly.
We can find horror
so red
in the
herring is what it is. It's crap.
We're afraid of what really is behind it as we end, and I'll say it out loud bluntly. We're afraid to talk about race. That's what we're afraid of. And yet, it is a fascinating subject. I had professors from all backgrounds. My major professor is white. He's an Africanist. I had an African professor who was trained in Europe. I had an African American professor in political science who worked on Tanzania. I had professors from everywhere. And nobody hurt anybody's feelings. Oh, we argued about this point of view, or that point of view, but that's what intellectual work is about, is debating the issues and getting different points of view. And different points of view get published on the same subject. And a lot of white people teach this subject. Sometimes students will react to them, but they're reacting more out of their lack of knowledge rather than knowledge. Right. Knowledge doesn't create the reaction. It's the lack of knowledge that creates the reaction. So I would advise everyone to get a book.
Sure, because it's born of ignorance. And just as we wrap things up, you mentioned earlier, and it's a false premise, but the ideology of race. Would you just define that for me quick? When you said that earlier, ideology of race, that is in reference to?
Ideology, by that I mean there's a set of ideas that have been created around race, and that one group of people are so radically different from another group of people. There are people, when my aunt was dying in Mississippi, and she needed a blood transfusion, the lady in the bed next to her found out that her blood transfusion was coming from a black person and didn't want it because something would happen to her if she got black blood. Well, there's no such thing as black blood. Okay, blood is. My husband is a clinical psychologist, and he deals with doctors and so on. Those, the human body is human no matter whose body it is. So last night they were talking about the Crown Act, the bill that the black program on black women, and somebody calling their hair bad, and so he signed. Women are discriminated against in businesses if they have braids, and so he had to sign a law. Just think about it. We had to have a law that you can't discriminate against anybody because their hair is different. And as one woman said, I am being discriminated against the way my hair grows out of my head. Right. Okay. So race is a false concept. It is a concept that...
is that your phone or mine?
I think it's mine. Okay. I forgot I had it.
That's all right. We have a little music background.
There are differences in biology, but the biology is fundamentally the same.
Sure.
Yeah. Our eyes are in the same place.
Right.
Our legs are in the same place. We all have red blood, not green blood.
Right. So when you say there's an ideology of race, I mean, that's the premise, and that there's differences based on what you look like or something along those lines. But it's inherently false because, as you say, beneath the skin, everything, we all physiologically are the same.
Physiologically, we're the same.
Yes. Everything. Yeah.
We have.
Well, I mean, that's just a given. Why do we have to even talk about that? That's obvious.
But that's what I mean by a set of ideas, and there's some fine work done now that is available, and if people are uncomfortable in being in a group, you can read it yourself, and it's good work by competent scholars from many backgrounds who have unpacked this topic of race, how it operates, how we stop it. We talked in my whiteness class a lot with students. Well, how do you end it? How do you get people to talk about it? to understand that discrimination is leveled at a lot of different people. I was reading something just a couple days ago about what's happened to Native peoples. I mean, we wiped out millions of Native people on this continent so that Europeans could come here and build a different kind of country, but we just felt comfortable wiping out these people. This has happened over and over again in history. To white groups, to black groups, to red groups, yellow groups, whatever. If we study history and the human sciences, we learn how we get into these issues. We learn how Nazi Germany emerged. We learn how Native people disappeared. And we hopefully will not let it happen again. So you won't feel bad for very long. Okay, if you have a good teacher.
Yeah, and having a good teacher is important.
Yes.
Professor Patterson, thank you for coming on today. You have class today? No, you summer school? Anything like that? You're on summer break.
We're on break.
You're on break,
yes.
But thank you for coming on. And in the different classes, African American Studies, you have several courses, and it's
yes, we're a department now.
Yep. Okay.
We weren't it wasn't a department when I came here. It had been here for 50 years, and took 50 years to become a department. Yeah. And our classes fill up. And sometimes students are just curious, sometimes they major and they go on to law schools and medical schools and so on.
Well, education shines a light on it. The more educated, the more informed everyone is, hopefully a better understanding. It's ignorance that allows a lot of this to perpetuate is what it comes down to. So thank you so much for coming on today. You're just terrific, and thank you for all you do. Really,
thank you.
Really good to have you on. Maybe we'll see you again soon. She was a little nervous before she came on. I said, stop it, you. All right, we'll take a break, wrapping things up. Thank you again, Professor.
Thank you.
Programming note about tomorrow right after this.